Okay, hello everyone. My name is Dimitri Sirota. I'm the CEO of BigID. Thank you everybody for joining us for this tea and trumpets, crumpets. Yeah, crumpets, bite-sized food. I'm excited to have a number of panelists with me today. We're going to talk a little bit about trends in data governance. I'm going to allow everybody to introduce themselves. Gary, maybe starting with you, and then Lee, and then Chris. So I'll go from the far side looking in. So Gary, do you want to just tell the audience who you are and where you work and why you care about data governance?
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Dimitri. So my name's Gary Manser. I'm head of data governance for Vanquis Bank. And I've been doing this now for too many years and have plenty of grey hairs because of it. I enjoy data governance because actually to me it's all about people. It's not policies, it's not standards, it's allowing me to get out in the business and meet everybody and get them to understand why I get excited about this.
Thanks, Gary.
Lee?
Hi everyone, I'm Lee Bigginden, the COO and co-founder of a company called Nephos Technologies. Nephos are a data systems integrator working with organisations like Gary's to help deliver on their data governance frameworks.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Chris?
Hi, my name is Christopher Glover. I'm the field CTO at BigID. I've been in data management for the last 25 years, working at companies like eBay and PayPal, where I led data governance or enterprise data architecture, and also CDI for eBay at the Inc. level. So eBay, PayPal, StubHub, Red Laser, MiloWare, and another 20 subsidiaries. I come from the technology side, and my introduction into governance is as I started to lead bigger and bigger functions around data, dealing with the compliance organization and other areas of the company for data governance became a necessity.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. Gary, why don't we kind of start with you, and maybe given your years of experience in data governance, maybe you could talk to the audience about your priorities at Challenger Bank. Like, what do you guys? Where did you begin? Where did you get started? And how did you prioritize what you wanted to do?
Yes, certainly. So I started very much, as I said, with people. So the first thing I actually looked for was my data ownership group, because I wanted the right people to buy into what I wanted to do. I'm really lucky. I've got my data owners are all board members. They all understand what we're doing, and they want to get there. From there, I've gone to my data stewards. One of them's actually sitting in the audience, but I won't embarrass him. And again, start to build that people function up, get them to understand what it is that they need to do. Yes, I've got a framework in place, I've got the policy in place, I've got a roadmap in place, and I'm dealing with some of the issues that the organisation has. But I'm very strong on, I believe it's all about people. I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. I'm in an organisation of 2,500 people. We're 18 years old. We've got a lot of bad practices. I need the right people to help me change those. So yeah, I would always say I start at the people level.
Okay, terrific. Maybe I'm passing it on to Christopher. Christopher, maybe speaking to some of your past experience at eBay, PayPal, talking about people versus process, maybe you could kind of weigh in. How did you view the whole data governance priority list?
Well, definitely frameworks help. I mean, it becomes a checklist, and it becomes a checklist for success in the organization. Gaining buy-in from the rest of the business and from the technology organizations was always important to me. So being able to have this checklist and explain what are our expectations for this data, what are our expected outcomes from this data, particularly as we start to talk about moving data to the cloud or hosting data in the cloud, having that checklist and having a great understanding by everybody of what the scope is, what the policies are, and what the practices around this data is important to the organization.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Lee, you have kind of a bird's eye view across multiple customers. What are you seeing in terms of focus on the kinds of data that organizations want to govern?
Well, it's quite interesting actually. So I think particularly, and I don't really want to talk about the pandemic, but we've seen a massive shift over the last 18 months in where data resides predominantly. So we've seen a big change in terms of where organizations have maybe been pushed harder and faster to get to the cloud. than they were thinking about doing.
Yeah.
So we've seen a big change there, and that's caused a lot of challenges around the tool sets that they've used, having the right capabilities in-house that can deliver on a framework but can do it across both strands, so the traditional on-premise and the in-clouds, and that's been a problem. And a big growth area in unstructured data, actually. You know, that file data, the unstructured data sets is growing astronomically, and that's a big problem.
Maybe we could kind of, Gary, talking a little bit about the cloud, right? I'd love to kind of get your point of view in terms of how does the cloud change things from a kind of a cloud governance framework, from kind of an architecture. Has it changed anything at all?
It's actually really interesting. I was thinking about what we were going to talk about yesterday, and I can remember being at one of these sessions, would have been about 12 years ago now, where somebody told me that I would be out of a job with the cloud because the cloud would do data quality for me, and it would do data governance, and it would do this, and it would, and it's the one time
You're still here.
I've walked out of one of these sessions, but I'm still here. I've still got a job to do. I think where we have the problems at the moment is we've got quite a good cloud structure. We put our data science team in the cloud. We put our data analytics team in the cloud. They know what they're doing, but we've got the same data still sitting on-prem, and we've got different people using it in different ways and coming up with different numbers. So my concern and the stuff I've got to do at the moment is, one, do we take time to reconcile that, or two, do I just switch off the on-prem? And that's probably more likely where we're going to go, is as soon as we can get data in the cloud and people can start working on it. We're an organization that's got a lot of technical debt. We've built on top of things, and we've built on top of things. We've had test systems that run critical processes. We're like any other bank. Everyone's done it, but we need to change that now. And my view is I'd rather have it in the one place, have it in the cloud, have the controls in there of who can access what, but actually then use some of the tools around here and be able to start putting things on people's desktops. My CEO gets a daily report in a PowerPoint. He should be able to press a button and just be able to see that. The data's already sitting there.
Yeah.
We're just not doing the right things with it at the moment. And I'm excited about our move to the cloud because we're going to start to be able to do some of that, but actually I get to control it. I get to put the rules over it and say, do you know what, Dimitri, you can see this data, but actually Christopher can't. And I can put a block in that stops Christopher seeing it. And it doesn't matter who he talks to in the organization, he's never going to get to see this piece of data.
Yeah.
At the moment, there are ways around access controls, and people get stuff that they shouldn't actually look at.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think with the cloud, certain things like access control, attribute-based access control become a lot simpler. I know, Christopher, you're working with the EDM Council on a working group around the cloud management data framework or control framework, something like that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you've seen as part of your work, both on the EDM Council and more broadly in terms of new control frameworks like access and whatever else you guys are working on.
Yeah, I mean, the CDMC, which is the Cloud Data Management Controls, or a set of capabilities, is really that checklist that I'm talking about. But speaking to what you were just talking about, is having a good understanding, and one of the controls is inventory. Understanding and cataloging that data, and then classifying it and understanding exactly what data you have, tying it to policies, which then dictate data handling practices around it. Protection for that data. How are you going to protect it? Who has access to it? So access is another component of control in there, but understanding who has access and these different ways to access the data, because there are many different ways, and you have to control everything in your environment. But having a consistent way to apply those policies and those controls across the different access points that you have is what's important. And that's what I talk to a lot of our customers about, is that consistency and being able to have consistent controls and apply them across clouds. Because I think the statistic is 93% of organizations have more than one cloud. And a lot of times people aren't even considering all the places that are actually clouds. If you have Salesforce in your environment, that's actually data that's in their cloud. But the control framework talks about accessibility. Lineage is a big piece of it that we talk about, understanding where that data come from. If you've got that report that's in your environment, Where are all the places that data came from that put that together? Because if you are trying to make that decision about, I want to shut down my on-prem systems, you better make sure that the report that's going to your CEO doesn't have a dependency on it.
Yeah, maybe Lee, since we're on the theme of the cloud, maybe kind of bind that with a little bit about what you were talking in terms of trends you're seeing around unstructured data. I'm curious to know, what are the kind of similarities and differences, right? What are you seeing in terms of how people are approaching data classification or identification? How are you seeing approaches to data stewardship? How do they differ between those two worlds that for a long time were quite apart, unstructured and structured?
Yeah, and I think the thing we're seeing is that people have they've got the frameworks in place for the traditional infrastructure, right? They've done that for a long period of time. Where they've struggled, and they've put tooling in place, right, to do that, to give them a holistic view. But what they don't have is something that spans across both. So where we've seen customers really struggle is to get one holistic view. So I don't want a tool that will go and classify and discover my data that's on-premise but not in cloud. Because then I've got 2 tools, and I've got 4 tools, because that's changing, it's evolving so quickly. So what most of our customers are really struggling with is one holistic view. I want something that does unstructured and structured data. I want in cloud and on premise, but I want it in one place. I want one view. My corporate risk is the same, regardless of where that data is. So I shouldn't really care. I just need a view. And that's the biggest challenge we've seen in a lot of our customers is having one view. And there's a lot of consolidation going on, I would say, over that tooling platform that are in place.
And I think it also comes down to kind of breaking silos, right? I think for a long time you do have a world of silos, different professionals in security and data governance having completely different lenses into the data. And again, only seeing portions of the data, whether it's the data lake or the warehouse or structured or unstructured or Kafka. And again, integrating that to have kind of one single pane of glass across everything.
Yeah, and I think actually during probably more recent times, 12, 18 months, we've seen a lot of change in the role within the business. So we've seen more and more the head of data. It used to be a compliance person, a governance person, a data person, More and more, we're seeing that role blend. Okay. The person that looks after data, well, you start, even if you want to drive analytics workloads, you need to understand data quality. Yeah. All of those sorts of things. So it's merging heavily, we're seeing within our customers.
Well, that's a positive sign for everybody here. It sounds
well,
like
you hope so, right?
The data people are taking over.
Yeah. So we won't be out of a job yet.
So Gary, tell us a little bit about how you're taking over the organization.
Well, no, I just want to pick up on that point there. One of my data stewards is a product guy.
Oh.
He's here to deliver a product.
Yeah.
And every time I sit down with him, he's like, but I don't understand data. This shouldn't be my role. And we are getting him to understand he's probably the right person to be doing the role that he's doing at the moment, because there's never a stupid question. And he's asking a different question than one of my data scientists is asking. And it's that ability to get people to think about, should I be doing this?
Yeah.
And that's the way we're looking at governance in our organization. The way I've got my stewards looking at it is, it's not, can I do this? It's, should I do this?
Maybe kind of double clicking on that, another group inside of an organization that never asks stupid questions is the board of directors, right? The CEO for sure never, and the rest of the board. I am curious about how you communicate artifacts around your data and even your goals in terms of data governance to the board, to the CEO.
So I was quite lucky. Our CEO is a data engineer.
All the best ones are.
He actually understands it, but not everybody else did. So I took my ideas first of all to the board and said, this is how we want to put the controls in place. I then took them the framework, stepped them through the framework at a very easy level, but then put a roadmap in front of them. And it's a roadmap I've shared with Lee and his company, that, do you know what, we're not going to do this overnight. It's going to take us a while. We've got to change a mindset. We've got to change the whole of the organization. So do you know what, I'm only going to do this little bit this year. And we're looking at the records retention piece, so identifying our PI, our PII, and making sure we've got those controls in place. But that's all I'm going to do this year.
Yeah.
I'm not looking at data quality, I'm not looking at data lineage, I'm not even looking at a data dictionary, business glossary. I'm doing that bit because that's the bit that is impacting us at the moment. and it's getting them to understand that. I once worked for a Big Four, and we were asked to quote on a piece of data governance work, and they wanted the framework implemented in a month, and we just walked away. I told our CEO at my interview with him that I was coming in to do something for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
In 5 years' time, he should be in a position that he can fire me because I'm not needed anymore.
Yeah.
But it was bringing the board along in that conversation, in that, yeah, we're going to do a little bit. So I've given you a set of accountabilities. We're only looking at number 1 today.
Yeah.
We're going to look at number 2 next week or next year or whenever. So yeah, it's that 2-year roadmap that's got them thinking about we're going to get to where we need to get to.
Don't promise the moon and deliver kind of like a rock. So, Lee, maybe on a related subject, I know that you also do work around security and you do work around data governance. In terms of what the boards that you work with or the executives that you work with want to see, maybe talk a little bit about the difference and the similarity between kind of that executive reporting around the risk around my data and the value around my data.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting. I think for a lot of the organisations we're working with, they want at board level that high level view, right? They want that where's our risk, what's our exposure, what's going to come and hurt us, what's the impact of what we're doing and how we're handling our data on the valuation of our business. That's kind of the main thing. And then as we filter down a little bit, we then see, okay, well, we've got all of this data, how do we drive some value from it? And we're seeing, I guess, some of that data catalog, data lineage, data quality piece feed into that, and it's feeding down. But at board level, with the bulk of the conversations we're having with people these days is around risk. It's corporate risk. That's the thing they care about most. And I think particularly at individuals, all of us are more aware of our own data, right, and where that's going and what organisations are doing with it. And I think to a certain extent, that has a much bigger impact on brand if it goes wrong.
Nobody wants to be embarrassed with an article in the Wall Street Journal.
Correct.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm curious, Christopher, from your past experience and the customers you're working with today, maybe you could weigh in as well in terms of that kind of dichotomy between demonstrating value around the data and demonstrating risk around the data. How did you see that interplay?
Yeah, I often describe this as a spectrum of risk. And where you are on that spectrum of risk, there are multiple factors that decide that. One of the key components of that is your understanding of the data itself. The less you know about your data, the less confident you can be about where you want to be on that risk spectrum. You want to be able to apply controls around that data to be able to move and position yourself so that you can get more value out of that data. And the granularity that you understand your data allows those controls to be much more specific and allows more opportunities to utilize and get value out of that data. So being able to apply controls to a certain system that understands the people who are accessing it, understands the roles of those people, and understanding the use cases that are attached to their roles. If you start to get to that level of specificity on the data and the access to that data, you can move yourself along that spectrum towards more value while maintaining your same risk profile that you've decided on.
And what do you think a CEO wants to hear? What do you report to them on a quarterly basis? What do you tell them about what you're doing on that spectrum?
The CEO is much more concerned about the risk side. The CDO is more concerned about the value that they're driving from that data. So I do think that it's more of a risk conversation with your CEO and the board, and it's more of a value conversation with the CDO.
Okay, thank you. Gary, yeah.
I would probably add to that. The best question I get either from my CEO or from my CRO, and that is, what does that mean? And if I do this, how does that change? And they're actually thinking in that marketplace now. I wouldn't tell my chief risk officer how to do his job, but I can tell him, but actually if you go and do that, you're increasing our risk out in the market. There's a risk of damage to the brand.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get organizations to understand. I used to work for Visa a while ago. The most important thing to Visa was the brand.
Yeah.
It had to be. It was damage the Visa brand, you damage it, across every single piece. And we're starting to have that conversation now as well. How is our data going to damage our brand? Because we don't want it to. We need to be seen as the customer champion in our marketplace. And they're asking those questions at a risk level now of where am I, what does it mean, what do I need to do to not be the bank that stands up and goes, we've got a problem.
So it sounds like one surefire way to get budget for that data governance problem or project you want is to highlight how it's going to save your company's brand and avoid brand impairment. Gary, one of the things you talked a little bit about is data quality, right? And I'm sure that's a topic that a number of the audience members think about. I think you pointed out that the cloud platforms don't do it automatically, despite maybe what some of them promise in their roadmaps. I am curious about your take on data quality and how the problem of quality has evolved with observability, and Confluent is right around, right beside us in terms of data pipelines. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you think about data quality.
I think, from my point of view, I think early in my career it was the be-all and end-all, and I had to have a rule, and I had to have 7 different rules on every single piece of data that I looked at. And it all became about that reporting and actually getting that fixed. The way we look at it now is we need key data to run our organization. Let's go and get that key data and make sure that we're reporting the right stuff. I'll pick on my data steward again. We now actually deliver to our credit reference agencies data that is 0 defects. And we're quite proud of the fact it's 0 defects. But we're thinking about what is it that we need to actually report on, not just go and say, right, everything in the cloud needs a data quality rule. It's more thinking about, I made up a word earlier in the year called volumetricity. I'd rather think about, have we got the right amount of data than necessarily have I got a title for every single one of my customers. So if we look at our transactional space, if we're expecting 100,000 transactions a day and one day we only get 10, we need a control in place that says we've got a problem here. Not necessarily, I know every single shop that somebody went into. And it's thinking about those controls that are going to help the business rather than necessarily, yeah, I've got a tick in the box here because I've got every single thing covered off.
Okay. And so thank you, Gary. Christopher, I'm curious about your point of view. You've worked at some large organizations. You work at a vendor today. They have a take on quality. Many of the vendors here at the show have a take on quality. How do you see the market around data quality, maybe more broadly data trust, evolving?
I think that, yeah, I mean, you mentioned 2 things really: the quality, which I think of more the mechanics of it, and I think about the customer trust, which is less mechanical and less tangible. I think the quality of the data actually drives outputs that are actually tied to the customer's trust. So that report that you generate, that decision that you make, being able to describe how you made that decision with the data that you had, and being able to have those processes in place requires that the data that you have, that you know the quality of that data. If you're making decisions with low quality data, it translates into an outcome that is not favorable for the customer. So I mean, I think that's where I see that juxtaposition, or that intersection between quality and customer trust. I mean, it was certainly it was inherent and drove the business at eBay. If you imagine eBay, somebody's going to sell you something and you're going to expect that maybe that thing's going to show up, and the other person's expecting that maybe you're going to pay for that thing. Trust was inherent in the business at eBay, and it translated into almost everything we did with the data, how we managed that data, the quality of the data, the decisions that we made on that data.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Okay, I'm going to kind of maybe just ask 2 more questions of Lee and Gary. Switching the subject up a little bit, and I think Gary touched on the topic of data lifecycle, records management, retention. Maybe Lee, you could talk a little bit about, what are you seeing in the market? What are people talking about? Are they looking at records management purely as kind of a backup effort? Are they looking at it from a perspective of data minimization? What are you seeing in terms of more broadly across your customer set?
Thank you. So I think for us, what we're seeing mainly, I suppose if you wind the clock back, probably 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of companies were we're going to keep everything forever because we don't know what to do with it, and we can't lose it, and we don't want to. I think we're seeing people be a lot more stringent about that these days. I think people are understanding of the impact it has on governance generally. But we see a lot of customers that still don't have a real handle on that. And if I suppose if you think about the fact that we're all trying to drive more value from our data sets, by nature we're keeping more of it, right? The more of it we've got, the more value we can drive from it, etc., etc. But the second we start doing that, we lose sight, we lose visibility over what we've got. So we're being asked more and more in recent times to go in and in fact I had a conversation with a customer this morning. We know we've got X amount of data. We know we've got 50 terabytes, 100 terabytes, petabyte, whatever. I can't tell you what it is, and we're being asked to prove at audit point what we have and that we're handling it correctly. And for me, it all comes back down to visibility. If you don't know what you've got, you can't possibly hope to handle it correctly. Yeah. So that's right now really hot topic within a lot of our customer base. You know, let's get a handle on what we've got. Let's understand what we've got. And then we can make some sensible decisions about how we handle it.
Yeah. Okay. And Gary, maybe just kind of finishing up with you. You're in a regulated company, in a regulated industry. And on the one hand, you have very, very specific restrictions or rules around what you keep, how long you keep it. You've talked a little bit about this new quality metric around volumetricity. I think you described it as, where you want to get more data as a way to get kind of better insight into a customer or into a transaction. How do you view the evolution of data retention, data aging, and in particular in the cloud, where you're now kind of paying for every gigabyte? What's going to happen?
It's interesting. I actually did a session on this last week as well, and one of the ways I'm looking at it is we've always, in the UK, especially in the financial services industry, we've got to keep it for 7 years. I don't know who came up with 7 years, but they would have made a fortune if they charged a penny every time somebody said it. But we're looking now as we work through our retention schedules going, do we actually need that? And going back to Lee's point of we want to keep everything, what value is it going to give us? What value am I going to get from data that's 10 years old? Because my product's changed, my customers have changed. 10 years ago, we weren't putting cards on smartphones. Now we're looking to do that. We're looking to do transactions through wallets and everything else. And it's looking at getting the organisation to go, do you know what, we can actually give that up. I was taught a long, long time ago by a data guru called Larry English. And his view was switch it off and just see who shouts loud enough. And that's very much the process I'm taking into place is as we start to go through our data, as we start to move it beyond use, that's what we're going to do is we're going to take it away. It's still going to exist, but we're going to take it away from people. Because if you've told me you need it for 7 years, but actually if I take the last 2 years away and you don't even realise, and actually you're making better decisions, I've just proven my point over your point.
So you're not deleting it, you're just retiring some of it and making it less available.
Very much. Eventually I'll delete it, but the work that we're doing through BigID, through Nefos, is we are moving it beyond use. So it will still exist in the organisation, it's just going to be over here and nobody's going to know it's there. Okay. The only person that gets to see it is me.
Which, by the way, will make CISOs very happy.
Yeah. But it is. We've got GDPR, we've got CCPR, we've got all of this stuff telling us we've got to do stuff anyway. Yeah. But there's still this, it's 7 years. Yeah. And regulatory-wise, from a fin crime point of view, yeah, there is a law that says we've got to keep our customer data 7 years. Actually, for everything else, no, there isn't.
Yeah.
And I want to be in that position where, yeah, I'm making it cheaper because we're not storing it. It's sitting away in a Mongo database somewhere that nobody knows it's there, but you're still being able to do your day job because you don't even know I've done it.
Yeah. No, great answer. Okay, maybe with the last 10 minutes remaining, I'll maybe take questions from the audience if anybody has any. Anybody want to ask a question of our panelists on quality, retention, cloud? Who's going to win the Premier League? Anything? No. Oh, yeah, okay. You want to know who's going to win?
More up to Gary. I'm a program manager, and every time somebody mentioned data governance, they roll their eyes, right? As if data governance will just delay the project. What are the three reasons that you can give, or I can tell the people when they mention data governance to defend the importance of it?
Now that's a good question, and I would look at it that we have the appropriate controls over the data at the beginning. So one of the things I talk about in Vanquis is governance by design. We have to do privacy by design because of GDPR. Why don't we do governance by design? So why don't we actually think about what we're capturing? So if we're building a front-end system, are we putting the right controls in place that says, if I'm going to put my date of birth in, I can't put in the 1st of January 2025? It's common sense a lot of the time, but a lot of the time it's the bit that's forgotten about because everyone's rushing to get the product out the door. So yeah, it's that, get those questions asked at the right time to avoid having to go back and doing it. So yeah, I would say there's one point, governance by design, and save your project having a revisit and fix later in the future.
Yeah, I've got a question. Can you hear me okay? Fabulous. So I'm the Chief Data Officer at KPMG, and we've been wrestling more recently with everything that you've talked about today, but particularly the data retention and records retention and all that kind of stuff. So, and interestingly, I wasn't traditionally expecting to kind of be accountable for that, and it's cool. I am now, and that's all great. But are you seeing a change in the way a CDO's role is, or is it your expectation as a kind of panelist there that actually you should cover everything data? We're kind of wrestling with that debate at the moment.
I'll go first, then I'll pass it down the line. I was actually surprised when I joined Vanquis that I was given records retention, because to me it sat in the data privacy area and everything else. But it is that now. I think it's time as professionals we moved away from data governance and actually started talking about information governance. So I should be worried about my information security controls. Somebody else is doing the job, but actually I should be worrying about them. I should be worrying about my records retention. I should be worrying about how I'm doing a DPIA, what DPIAs we're doing, and I actually move my role into that info-gov space rather than a data-gov space. Change of one word and it still goes back to Larry English, but it's information that we're dealing with, and it's, yeah, I've got to worry about all of that. I don't know if anyone else wants to add something.
I think our question taker's not listening anymore. Anyway.
No, I am listening. I was going to do a follow-up as well, actually. Yeah.
Did you want to follow up?
I was going to ask, and then obviously I want to listen to you. Where does the DPO then fit within that framework, or the kind of that structure?
In my world, I would have the DPO reporting to me.
Okay.
So it doesn't quite happen at the moment. I'm new to the organisation and we're still going through that journey. But the DPO has a very important role to do. But they tend to be, if we look at 3 lines of defence, they very much tend to be second line, and they're very much hands off, and they tell you what you can do, but actually don't ask me to get involved. I'd rather have my data stewards understand what it is that they need to do and make them mini DPOs. And actually, yeah, we've got the DPO at the second line, but we're going to deliver information governance at the front line. That first line piece where they're already thinking about it. It's not somebody looking over their shoulder.
Okay, thank you. Apologies.
No worries. Thank you for that question. I think I've seen that role evolve. I mean, I grew up in an industry where a CDO didn't really exist as a title, and I've seen that title evolve, and I've seen different, I'd say, skill sets come in to fill that role at different companies. And I do think that it's a role that is maturing, and it's starting to become more defined, and the responsibilities are growing up as well. So it's interesting to hear your question. I think a lot of CDOs came from the data and analytics world. They were responsible for analytics and reporting, driving value, data democracy. But now I think we're seeing CDOs are starting to take on more of that responsibility for compliance compliance and for security of the data and information and report, and that accountability to the CEO and to the board.
Sounds like there's a bright future for CDOs.
It is, yes.
You talk about data quality and data accuracy and data and information. What is the information and data about is my big question. How do you define these two terms? I would say that unless you know what the information is about, you don't have any information. I call what you have information about is an entity.
I'm getting all the tough questions today. I would say data is just what's sitting in the database. It's the knowledge that we put behind it that creates the information. So I look in my organization, and to me the most powerful piece of data we have is the transaction. It's not the customer detail, it's nothing else. It's the transaction is important to us. If we don't understand what that transaction is telling us, then we're not doing our jobs correctly. I can look at a transaction, I can understand where you're choosing to spend your money, what you're choosing to spend your money on, how you're choosing to pay because you've chosen to use your credit card, you've not done BNPL or anything else. And I look at, it's that once I've defined what I'm using that data set for, I've created the information that sits behind it.
But how do you then design the quality of that? The transaction. What is then the quality?
I then look at what is it that I really want to need to know. So if I go back to the volumetricity one, am I getting the right number of transactions coming through the door for the business to be able to run and understand what it's doing? If I'm looking at my customer journey, and we pride ourselves on, we want to be the customer champion, it's going to show us if people aren't spending on their card because they can't do contactless, or it's rejecting online, or anything else. We're getting that information from our transaction. We get it if it rejected, we get it if it goes through, we get it if it's cross-charged or recharged or whatever. And that's where I start to think about my quality check. So I don't necessarily need to know that it was boots that you shopped in. What I do need to know is you shopped in this merchant, it was this transaction because you presented your card, it was for this value, and this is what happened after the event. Is this answering your question, or am I just waffling?
I'm afraid not quite, but I pass on the...
Anyone else?
There's a shortage of microphones in the country.
Thanks. Just there you talked about transactional data and then customer data separately. So would you call, firstly, that customer data, do you refer to that as master data ever? Because we've not heard too much here about the terminology, master, reference. And then the second part of it is, would you have different data governance, maybe do you have different data governance policies and procedures around master, reference, transactional?
I would call it master data. If you ask one of my colleagues, they'll probably call it customer data because I come from that regime. So one of the things I'm looking at in the organization is, yes, I need a master data standard that tells me how often do I look at that data, how often do I want it updated. It could be my customer data, it could be my supplier data, it could be any of those. But I want a standard in place that says this is how I do this, this is where I store it, this is how often we ask for an update on it. Whereas my transactional data is updating real time daily. So I do move it away and refer to it differently. But yeah, I'm from the view customer data is master data. It needs its own standard that sits around it, needs its own controls around it. So I would agree with you. But as I say, my colleagues might think differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important question as to whether you define it as master or reference data. From my perspective, you've got data, and it kind of ties into the last question we had, which is when you've collected that data at the transaction level, it's just data. And it takes some curation to become information, and then curation to become insight, and then wisdom, which I think we used to call that the information ladder. when we talk about master data management, I do think that it's a curated data set. It takes effort normally in the life cycle of that data to get it to a point where you call it a mastered set of data. And mastered, I think, over time it's had this definition that like there can only be one master version of the data. And I think we get to a point now, and at least I got in trouble all the time with my business partners because defining one view of that data was not going to work across the organization. What risk wanted out of the data was different than what the marketing or analytics or customer personalization or customer service wanted out of that master view of data. I think reference data is a little more easy to define, that there are these sets of data that you've acquired either internally or externally that define how you should be and should be consistent across your organization. I don't know that I would call it a difference between like customer data or transactional data. I mean, at a certain point, you're going to define a master set of data around customer, around product, around other entities in your organization.
Just going to add one last point on that. I seem to be doing all the talking. One of the ways my policies have looked at that in the past is, yeah, I still believe there should only be one list of our customer, but there's no reason, and I hate moving into these types of terms, so you can all tick off the bingo card in a minute, but we have a golden source of that information. But we should be allowed to create silver copies that give us what we need from that data. All that needs to be in place is that there's always reconciliation back to that first source. So there's no reason why finance shouldn't have a copy of the data that looks completely different to what product get, as long as it comes from that one main source originally and has the controls to link it back to that one main source. And it's not, we created something in 1999 that actually they're still working to today.
Last questions? Anybody? Last opportunity. You're not going to get married
Going once.
Okay, so thank you. Oh no! Oh, I thought somebody put their. You sure? You sure? Okay, so I think we'll kind of wrap up. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Hope you found this informative, maybe even a little bit instructive. And again, if you have any questions for folks, I'm sure you can get a hold of them through their names. I think it's up there. And yeah, thank you very much, and enjoy today and tomorrow.